I will start with one or two, but I'd very much like to invite everyone down. There's one microphone in the center, and I would say during our first question that I'll pitch out to everyone. If people want to make their way down and form a casual line, I'll go to those questions as soon as possible. My question that I think, hand over to everyone, maybe we'll start at the end and come down. I mean, there's so much going on here. This is more than just a photograph. There is a story and a connection. It is the gold in our wedding bands, the shrimp in our freezer. And we've been talking about process. I'm a little more interested in a conceptual process. I think we all understand things that we see based on what we do. And I do documentary film, and so I have ideas that I'm looking for. Certainly we need visuals, we need a story, we need a theme, and we want those visuals to drive the story, and the theme and what you take away will be a product of that story. And so I'm trying to understand, what are your hooks? What are you looking for to put these pieces together? Especially when it is a larger story. It is the story of that person in that mine, but you're making that connection back to us, the Western audience, in their homes. I'm curious how you put that together conceptually, and maybe for this one we'll start at the end and come down this way. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, in this case, I sort of felt from the beginning that I was going to fall short of a full story. You know, I knew there were just gaping holes in what I could achieve, and that just became more and more apparent, you know, as we kicked around Thailand. You know, this is a developed country. There's a lot of money at stake, and a lot of vested interest in making sure that, you know, these abuses in the industry go unseen. And that was very clear. And there was a lot of fear in the people we were dealing with, a lot of fear. Just to talk to us and being seen with us, paranoia reigned. And so I knew it would be sort of, you know, as a writer, it's a write around, and you know, sometimes that actually works out for the best. I was with a friend, a writer, Dmitry Kenarov. We did a story in Belarus, and we wound up getting picked up by the KGB. They're still called the KGB in Belarus, and they look like refrigerator goons, you know. And you know, I was trying to do a story on the Chernobyl zone, and I didn't even make it there. So what now? He was doing a story on tractors and wound up spending time in solitary. And in a way, you know, it drove the point of the story home, you know, that this is still like a suspended Soviet state, and you're in an alternate universe. Photographically, a lot different. So I guess what I tried to zero in on was getting a few portraits just to show very directly, you know, the people who were involved. And even that was difficult, to get people to come forward. And I think, you know, just some of the shots that I took in these really nice factories, because it just strikes a very stark contrast, maybe psychologically, with the narrative that I tried to create as a writer, and then the visuals that you have. But you know, ultimately, I think it's a work in progress. It's incomplete, and my initial goal was to document the industry there and then try and bring it back home. And I still am working on that, you know, from the factory to the plate, every step of the way. And I felt, you know, short of, you know, that the video excerpt, which we didn't play, where we were able to get some very grainy footage, it was kind of a failure photographically as a story, and it still stands incomplete in my mind. But I think it also speaks to the challenges of getting that story and why so many have been unable to push it forward, because the access is very challenging, and it's hard to, with all of those variables, it's hard to shape a complete story.
For me, you know, as I mentioned when I was at the podium, you know, what I normally would try to do, you know, conceptually, or just, you know, as an attempt to communicate, is really embed myself and get intimacy, as Nadia mentioned and Dominic mentioned, and I think that's, you know, that's tends to be the best way. But like I said, there were so many pieces to this story that I wanted to tackle. That you know, in the end, as far as communicating it, I mean, I went for that intimacy where I could, but other than that, it was, I mean, I ended up calling the story, Where Does Chocolate Come From? I mean, that's the name of this photo essay. And I think that when you kind of see that and then you start clicking through it, what you expect is the kind of, the sanitary factory, the step-by-step process of producing something like this. and the kind of Willy Wonka elements to it. And I'm glad that I have those shots, and I think that that's the way to kind of draw people in, is to say you are going to see the step-by-step process. But the step-by-step process suddenly includes rape and refugees and violence and burned down homes. And so I think that that was kind of you know, that's basically it. That is the concept, is to say, you know, step by step, here's how it gets to your door. So
that's great. Thank you. Larry?
Well, I'm in a pretty good position with this story because it literally, for me, has just started. I mean, as I mentioned, I've been thinking about the notion of child labor, you know, as a long-term project, probably for more than 15 years now. You know, I've got, you know, hundreds of documents and stacks of research and so forth. So for me, one of the challenges is like, well, you know, how do you start this? I mean, I'm freely admit that I'm actually afraid of this story. I mean, or have been in the past. I'm not so much now, but I tend to look at story initiation. You know, I just, yeah, it's very simple for me. I start with research and I read everything I can. I start trying to figure out, you know, what's known about a story, what's been published. You know, what are the missing pieces? What are the holes? And you know, that's sort of how I started got onto this notion of gold and child labor. You know, I had read a lot of articles and paid attention to the literal price of gold. It's up over $1,700 an ounce now. So you know, a lot of stories in the media were talking about how that's driving child labor, how it's you know, it's people becoming more frantic to get gold, and so it's a big economic story. So there's a natural interest out there, and I actually had started down a path to relate it to, you know, environmental issues. You know, I mean, it's a little bit esoteric, but I was looking at a story involving lead pollution in the recycling battery industry involving children, you know, in India. I mean, that's how it all started. But the more I started looking at it, it became obvious that, you know, the access that I might get, or that I actually demanded for this particular story, since I was doing it on my own terms, was going to lead me in a different path. So I think journalists have to be open to changes, and I think you really have to find something that, you know, you really need to be passionate about your subject. And you know, I mentioned that I'd photographed a couple of stories on child soldiers, you know, early on in my career. And I just feel a deep sense of empathy, and you know, I identify with you know, children in crisis. So you know, I think it behooves us to you know, to follow those emotions. And you know, my own you know, that story would have been a failure had I not been able to get the access. But you know, that was a big gamble and a big risk. So I don't know how this is going to turn out. I want it to be, you know, global in scope. It needs to be broad. It needs to be across many different cultures, you know, just to flesh out the story. What I don't have now, I mean, I have, you know, some interesting images of the actual process of children working in mines, but I've had very little time to sort of, you know, in the moment, you know, try to depict family life, you know, so, you know, things like that. So those are beyond, you know, what we call our shot list. You know, we have these ideas, and then you're just tuned into them. So I tend to approach things, you know, the way, you know, like a magazine would, you know, and just funnel it down and simplify it. This is a little bit of an anomaly for me, so it's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, conceptual process?
So basically, as I said before up on the podium, I found this story in terms of access, for the most part, easier in the grand scheme of stories that I work on, in terms of gaining access to people's homes and their lives and their willingness to talk to me. What I found difficult in terms of telling the story visually was, as I said, how to tell a story about something imminent that hasn't happened yet, that doesn't exist yet, and the threat of what could happen. And as I said, I wanted to make a connection for the viewer with the intimacy of people's lives and them as an individual. But the story needed something more visually to link it together. And what I do in this case sometimes is I think of a specific emotion that speaks to me. The story speaks to me, and the place. And what I felt about this place is that it was somewhat of a ghost town. You have a bar with a lonely guy drinking beers without any friends anymore. And you have a preacher preaching to 3 people and 3 churchgoers every Sunday. And that's because a quarter of the population exists in this place, and pretty soon if the permits go through, on this project, nobody will be there anymore. And so I had to link together a lot of elements of history, environment, danger, threat to human lives, and already a contaminated river that exists there. And so for this, I think the most challenging part was sort of what I call the environmental portrait images that link together with the intimate portraits of people. And what I focused on was sort of this lonely ghost town idea, and how to create images surrounding that emotion.
Thanks.
What we saw today is about 10 days worth of shooting, and because of that, when I came back home, looking at the first set of images, felt like it was a lack. What I feel like is most important is actually lacking in this set of pictures, and that's a sense of intimacy. And it was kind of the reason why I looked at fishermen to begin with, was because I felt like they were often pointed at as the bad guy in environmental issues. If you're looking at the oceans, it's obviously overfishing, which is taking out all these fish, and that's true, but I also wanted to show the stories of the fishing and the people that were behind these stories. So when I went out this last time, I mean, my whole purpose, I only went out fishing one time, and where the last time I did lots of fishing, and this time I was more concerned in seeing the lives of their families and spending time with them that way. And so this last trip was just about me making deep, long connections, and I stayed in one town the whole time, where the first trip was more about me looking into trying to understand the place, because I went into this not knowing enough about it, other than research and reading about it. It wasn't like I grew up there. So the first trip was really just me covering lots of ground, learning as much as I could, and talking with Eric and us interviewing lots and lots of scientists, and trying to understand that whole, and economists, about what does this really mean? What does emptying the world's aquarium? And so going back on this next trip was actually, I almost feel like this first set of photographs is research, and the next set is me going back and with these themes in mind of showing the face of the fisherman. What does it mean to be a fisherman, and what is the story behind this plate of food that we all enjoy so much, but also trying to understand that theme of man and nature and its relationship, and so kind of looking under the water more and looking at the relationship to man and the environment that way.
It strikes me as all the answers are very personal. We talk about process like it's about the lens choice, but your answers are very much about how you see the world. And I don't have any questions yet, but I invite you. Oh, wonderful.
I speak English, and that's about it. I've studied several languages, but never became fluent in any of them. And the one that I know the best, in addition to English, is Dagbani, which I learned when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in rural Ghana, and it's completely useless anywhere except for this 700,000 people that speak it in northern Ghana. So
There must be a king in Ghana, the white guy who speaks.
They do like it a lot. I should just do all my stories there, actually, because they love it. But I was quite lucky for this story because Austin Merrill, the writer I was with, he did his Peace Corps experience in Ivory Coast, and he spoke no French before moving there, so he learned very specific Africanized Ivorian French, and so he's quite good at navigating us through. But other than that, it's through fixers. But I actually feel, other than kind of getting from point A to point B, as far as relationships with people, sometimes for a photographer, it is better to have a language barrier. You have all these other like weird ways you find of communicating. It kind of forces you to joke around with people. You can often be accepted by not being able to speak verbally. And also I find that sometimes when I'm photographing people that speak English, they just like don't stop talking, and so it gets very difficult to make a good picture then as well. So language barriers can be something you can use to your advantage.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. I took French in high school, which was basically a miserable failure, but I remembered, you know, enough of the grammar and the vocabulary to get by in Africa. You know, I traveled for years in most of the countries there, and you know, if you speak a smattering of French and English, you can get by. But I grew up in South Texas, so you know I have a pretty good command of Spanish, not necessarily conversational, but you know I can get by. But you know, journalists, we rely on help. You know, hiring translators and hiring good translators. And I might add that translators do love photographers because, you know, they go sit in the shade. You know, we're out there working. You know, we kind of speak smile. You know, we do that. And, you know, but it's always great to have people out there in the field watching your back. And I might add it's always funny to anticipate an organization's eyebrow raising whenever you put a proposed budget together and it includes translators and fixers. You know, they don't quite get it, you know, but in some cases. But if, you know, my advice, if you are going to do work, you know, overseas and abroad, get command of a language. You know, it is an amazing resource. You know, figure out something that you know you want to get command of and do it while you're young. It doesn't get any easier.
I speak Italian, Portuguese, and English, and I understand Spanish, none of which are useful in Romania. And so I, like most of us, also rely a lot on interpreters, or useful in a lot of the world. So I also rely on interpreters and fixers in a lot of the stories that I work on. And like to add to what Peter was saying, as a photographer, a lot of times you can get by without a translator. And in fact, it's a way in which I've learned much of my language skills in both Portuguese and Italian has been working on stories in these languages and having to be inside people's families' houses without the help of a translator and having to communicate. I once had somehow, I don't know how, had a 2-hour conversation with a bunch of Iranian girls in a mosque for 2 hours, none of which either of us spoke the same language. So it's possible to use body language and yeah, the language of smile, and understand each other on a different level. And it's quite a rewarding experience communicating with people in that way and going beyond the words, I suppose. So.
I'm fluent in Spanish, so that obviously helps working in Mexico. But I agree with Peter. Actually, sometimes I've been, you know, working in other countries and I don't speak the language at all, and it's easier to sometimes just go straight to work instead of having to have like a lot of small talk. On this job, actually, because it was one of the few jobs I've worked in Mexico. Well, in Mexico, I work alone often, but I was working on this with just Eric often, and sometimes we would use, like what we would do is we'd call up scientists or people that were doing some research in the region just to kind of put us in the right direction because it is a dangerous place right now with the drug war, and so we obviously had to make sure that we did our research before we just went around. But this time it was up to me actually to navigate most of that stuff, and you know, Eric did a fantastic job of getting lots and lots of good contacts, and then we just worked together, and when we got to the field, then I would just work on navigating those contacts that we got, and so yeah, speaking another language obviously is fantastic.
Great. So we have another question. I also know we're running on the late side. Some of my students are out there. They know I don't like to keep them late. And we have refreshments upstairs. When I was talking to Peter in the green room, he made a comment which he said, that's a better way to have a conversation anyway. And I would agree. So I think what we'll do is we'll take the questions that are here and then invite everyone to come upstairs and continue the discussion in a more casual way. So go ahead, please.
So first of all, thank you all so much for taking time out of your undoubtedly busy schedules to be here. My question was, I'm assuming that you all walk into these research endeavors and these journalistic endeavors with a purpose in mind, that you've researched these things, you want to illuminate an issue, gather pictures, evidence, whatever, writing samples, and introduce it to a market that needs a lot of attention. But when you go to these locations and you talk with the locals, I'm wondering to what extent you encounter disillusionment among the locals who see these people as, oh, just another journalist who's here going to try and investigate this issue, but doesn't really, like, they don't think that you're going to be effective in your endeavors. To what extent do you experience that? And then do you have to, like, how do you change your story or accommodate with that local perspective when you go and publishing?
You guys want to switch it up and start with Dominic?
Yeah, I'll go. Actually, that's an interesting question. I ran into that a lot on this recent trip. We were in a northern part of the Sea of Cortez, and they were really worried because this region is a refuge now for what is known as the vaquita, which is a small marine mammal. It's actually the most endangered marine mammal in the world. And there's only 200 of them left, like they've barely ever been seen. You can't see them underwater because the water is all brown. And actually a lot of fishermen don't even think they exist. But there's been photos that have come out of them with them in their nets. And so obviously, as a photographer wanting to work in that place and go out with fishermen, that was a bit of a challenge. For us, you know, and I think it's important, you know, also everything that we had read before, I could almost say has been different when we actually got there. There was research about the Seri town actually saying that they managed this research very well, and we found that there was lots of levels of corruption in the same communities, and that you know, this research was out of date or out of touch, and so I think it's important as a journalist that you just go with an open mind, and people really respond to that. I think if you don't come up there with this preconceived notion of okay, I have an idea of what this is and I'm trying to collect evidence. You're not trying to collect evidence to create an argument. You're trying to understand this topic.
Yeah, I can speak to the difficulties sometimes of people wanting to be paid when I photograph them, and which is something that happens quite often, especially since a lot of times I'm photographing people that are in very difficult economic situations. And although on the one hand I would like to help them in that way, besides not having the means to spread the wealth around, ethically I find it, you know, I don't find it very ethical. And I'm amazed continually at the people that open their lives to me for nothing, for just the possibility of documenting their lives, and many of them don't expect or think that anything necessarily will come out of this for them in a good way. Some do. And so I think that is a big challenge, and explaining to the people why I can't pay them, because they just think, oh, this is a woman from a big fancy magazine, she's here with a translator, she must have money, looks like she has a nice necklace on, and that kind of thing. So I also, you know, dress down usually as much as possible, but not to the point where I'm not myself. I'm always very honest with people about my life, and I open up to people a lot in the process of documenting them, so that they feel, you know, they can possibly learn to trust me, and that I'm, you know a little bit about me, because I'm asking them to open up a lot about them. So yeah, it's not just about kind of going in there, slam bam with the camera, and you're probably not going to get very far that way. So yeah, it's a lot of like Dominic was saying, listening to people a lot of listening, a lot.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that. I think that, you know, establishing rapport and really being disciplined about spending just a lot of time, you know, with your subjects. I mean, that, you know, having, you know, a constant stream of journalists, for instance, going through an area where there's a big news story or something, I mean, you know, they sort of get shell-shocked by the media. But a lot of the stories that, you know, we're talking about here really do afford, you know, a sort of a gentler, more subtle approach. I mean, there are always deadlines and there are always things to do, and you always have to multitask. But, you know, if you can learn, you sort of learn these situations where you can sort of predict that a picture, for instance, is going to unfold. Well, you can do two things. I mean, you can force it, you can set it up, you know, or you can let it happen naturally. And I think that's what the best, you know, photojournalists do. They let, you know, that's been my experience, and it really is, again, you know, learning to be empathetic, you know, with your subject, and really communicating that you understand, you know, their given situation. You know, the Philippines piece was, the irony there was that I think it's one of those rare stories where what you envision is almost exactly what you end up with, you know, and at least in this case. And that, you know, it's wonderful when that happens. You know, I was really concerned about it when I was told that I'd be able to visit, you know, these 5 really interesting areas that had been photographed only once or twice. And as it turned out, I mean, most of these people had never seen a photographer or a journalist. So, you know, there was this immediate accepting, but, you know, what surprised me was the, you know, I didn't just walk into these places. You know, I had to go through the, you know, the little audiences with the local mayors and the police captains, and to this day I don't understand exactly why I got, you know, where I got with certain situations, but I think it probably has something to do with, you know, just letting the subjects talk, and understanding, and being willing to change your outlook, you know, or to be objective. You know, objectivity is another key thing here. You know, we all have points of view, but you know, we don't want to be making, you know, the facts, you know, fit the concept.
I'm going to jump in here, sorry, just because we're about 20 minutes running over time, so I'm going to suggest maybe, unless Jason and Peter have burning desire to answer that specific question, that we move on to the next question and maybe just have 1 or 2 of you answer it so that we can go ahead upstairs to the reception and continue the conversation. Okay.
So last question then.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Piper, and I'm the director of a group called pH Balance Films, and we are focusing on using film to bring more awareness to people about how we all fit in supply chains. So I really, really appreciate the work that you guys have done. And my question is from a consumer perspective. Now that we know, how we're connected to the shrimp that are coming from Thailand, our gold and our wedding bands, what do you recommend that consumers do about the different issues that you've seen in your work?
Maybe we could have a shrimp person and a gold person answer that, possibly? Does that make sense?
That's all you.
Yeah.
We'll start, you guys got short shrift, you want to?
First.
Well, you know, I can tell you right now, my wife's kind of pissed I'm not wearing my gold wedding dress. No, seriously. You know, we're not, I mean, no one's against gold. I'm not against gold. It's like anything else. You know, you have to make the decisions about, you know, what fits into your lifestyle and your moral center. Some people eat organic, some people eat beef, you know, whatever, you know, but I think, you know, the journalist's role is to basically, as someone said, illuminate. You know, it's, you know, there's an old cliche, you know, that we don't take sides, we take pictures. You know, that's from way back, but it's impossible not to take sides. But you know, I've always tried to you know, not be so forceful in my own viewpoints. I just prefer to let the photographs speak for themselves and for, you know, consumers, you know, to make up their minds. But it's wonderful to have the information out there to consume in an honest way.
You guys at the end want to give it a crack?
Sure, yeah. I like shrimp, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't eat shrimp while I was in Thailand. It's hard to avoid, and they're damn good. I have it here. I haven't been confronted with that enticing dish yet. But no, I mean, in direct answer to your question, there you are. Oh, sorry. Blinded by the light. I think in this case, it's pretty clear-cut with shrimp. You just don't know where the shrimp we're eating in this country are coming from. There are certain treaties that are in place that all the major importers, wholesalers use. And you know, when they go to Thailand, that's the dog and pony show they get, those nice pictures in that factory. It's as sterile as can be. And they stop asking questions. So I think it's incumbent on consumers, if you're feeling motivated, to put pressure on these major companies and say, well, how far down the chain do you really go? Can you show me that, you know, it says made in Thailand, it has a number, and you trace that number back to a large factory like that. But can you show me a number or some evidence that takes it all the way back to the farm where it was produced? And it's pretty clear cut. It is a feasible solution, but it costs money. And it's inconvenient, so a lot of people want to turn a blind eye. But of course, in doing that, it opens up a whole other host of other issues like human trafficking, you know, abuse of migrants, and so on. But I think that's a good place to start. Yeah.
I think I need to give Peter a crack at that because I don't wear gold and I can do without shrimp, but you can't take away my chocolate.
Yeah, and you know, it's, you know, you can. There is a lot of cocoa and chocolate out there that is specifically, you know, states where it comes from, states that it's organic and that the farmers had a fair pay, etc. And the problem with chocolate really is that it's not a question of, you know, it's not a kind of slave labor question. I mean, there are plenty of issues with child labor in cocoa and Ivory Coast, which I didn't even go into in this piece. But even if that wasn't the case, I mean, it's not a question of trying to get, you know, factories to mandate things better or you know, demanding equal rights for farmers. I mean, this is an entire country that's in the middle, or they claim the end, but I think we're going to see this continue for a long time, of a decades-long civil war over land rights. So I mean, there's really no clear answer there because it's not like the whole world can say, you know, we're not going to eat cocoa until you know, your entire country gets its act together. So I think I'm just going to have to end this one on a depressing note. I don't know what else to say. So
I want to jump in here.
Dominic needs a good chance.
Actually, Eric and I, as we've driven across and have nothing to do in the Sonora Desert for hours, we talk about this nonstop. And for a long time, Eric was like, I'm not eating shrimp anymore. And I started feeling the same way. And then it was the same sort of thing. You like go to a shrimper's house and you're like, of course I'm going to eat this shrimp. But then you start thinking about it. And it's like, you know what? It's not just like I'm sure the cocoa farmers at the end of the day too. It's a resource. The resource isn't evil. The extraction and the processes and the things around it.
The demand for it
exactly.
is what it is, you know? Like the demand for gold is so strong right now because it's safer, it's a safer investment than oil and currencies because of the global economy. So of course, like the demand for gold shoots up, and yeah, it's not the actual thing necessarily. It's the value put on that in the circumstances.
Exactly. And it's also, I think, in a lot of ways reflective on capitalism and how capitalism works. You know, natural resources are not limitless. And the way capitalism works is it says that you can go out and you can keep extracting, and good businesses is if you're making money on something, you need to extract more. And for fishing, if you're making money on fishing, you get more fish. And it's a very simple law of the commons. And I think that we have to look at how capitalism is working in our society. It's not, yes, it's up to the consumer to put pressure on our governments, but if you stop eating shrimp, the few hundred shrimp that you eat a year, it's not going to make much difference on the global scale. It's not going to make much difference. And also, we're talking about people that have livelihoods that are based on cocoa, shrimp, and these are people that have jobs, and for them, you know, people come all the way from Burma to do these jobs. And so I think it's up to us to put pressure on governments to look into new ways and to work on, you know, global standards for workers' rights and for how that they can, you know, make more sustainable legislature.
Folks, this is so rich, and I hate to cut it off. A couple times I forgot you were even here. I was paying so much attention to what these folks were saying. But we have refreshments upstairs. I just want to close with echo Natalie about the work of the Pulitzer Center, and that these are stories that otherwise would not reach us at all. And I think that deserves one more round of applause and a lot of respect.